I am going to give an award tonight to Janice Wagman. I can read this. Can you provide the names of other United States cities comparable in size, population, and climate to Royal Oak, and in a state with declining population that have implemented these proposals for higher density, including ADUs, right-sizing streets with bike lanes, eliminating surface parking in the downtown, etc., where the intended goals were achieved? If so, where?
Well, I think everybody's been doing this much more recently. So it's portions of the goals have been achieved, but not all of them. So I'd say the biggest one, and Paul, you might have some thoughts on this too, the biggest, so we have to think about Royal Oak in its context with Metro Detroit. So it's a city amongst this larger metro. So it's a bit more comparable to like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the changes that they've made from an approach to biking and walking and infill in their downtowns. You know, let's set aside all the controversy over single-family homes there too. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about their focus on biking, transit, walking, and infill of historic neighborhood downtowns. Their historic downtown, and you know, Minneapolis is more like the Detroit. St. Paul is like somewhere in between. But they've seen a lot of success in doing so. Buffalo's trying to, but they don't have. They've had a much more significant decline in population than Metro Detroit has. Do you have some examples, Paul?
I don't have specific city examples. I was just more going to comment on there's a statewide housing problem, and the government of the state of Michigan has a statewide housing plan to address aging housing stock, the fact that housing is becoming unattainable for many people. And I guess it's just in context, as Matt said, these problems are problems that communities across Metro Detroit are dealing with and grappling with in some way. So I don't have a case study, I guess, that ties a particular solution to everything that Janice just asked for. But
it's also not unlike the work that's been done in Cincinnati and in Columbus. You know, both bigger than Royal Oak, but have neighborhoods that approximate the scale, and they've seen changes in their neighborhoods that they've been following similar patterns. Now, the growth thing is interesting, and that's where like it's a little bit confusing. Like, well, how did we lose population and we need more housing units? Because I know that's been asked, and that has to do with the reduction in family size. And typical household size has been going down as the population had declined. So you've ended up needing more housing units for the same number of people, and so that fuels the demand for housing. But then there's also a regional demand for housing. It's not only the folks who already lived here needing housing. There's the sort of attractiveness. I mean, you all love Royal Oak for reasons, and there's a desire to live here for many people in the region, so that does drive growth in the city. It's not like boom times everywhere, but it is an incremental growth that right now, because it's hard to build, and you know, you don't have a bunch of greenfield land, so what you have is infill. Because it's really hard to build, that then becomes more expensive. But in terms of bike infrastructure, there are certainly cities that are investing a lot in that in cold climates. That's why I bring up the Minneapolis area. Again, bigger city, but they've invested quite a lot into bikes and transit, but also crazy hot places. Like Phoenix has invested a lot into bikes and transit, and you wouldn't want to bike there in the summer, just as you wouldn't want to bike here in snowy conditions. I'd say we're also seeing that in some Canadian cities. So Toronto and Montreal have been adding quite a bit of bike infrastructure. Winnipeg has been doing the same. So it's not really so much a winter thing. As for lane reductions, that is also happening pretty much in most cities across the country, whether it's a hot climate or cold climate, because there is sort of renewed push for people to want to be able to walk. And so you're kind of seeing that everywhere. In terms of a specific case study, I don't have off the top of my head. Here's the equivalent to Royal Oak somewhere else. Size-wise, right now I'm working in same size as Bentonville in Arkansas, of all places, but vastly different condition. They're growing rapidly, but they've realized that in order to deal with their traffic issues, that they need to both have housing near where people are going out and and to jobs and shopping and so forth, and also build the bike infrastructure to connect it all. Their issue, just like most other places, is there's not really a lot of transit, and there's not a great public support for transit, but they're trying to set themselves up so that they can support it when it does come.
I would just make the comment, we're trying to compare places. No place compares to Royal Oak. Sorry, people. I'm not going to accept that. But I would just say really quick about Minneapolis. I've been there, and those crazy people use their rail trails in the middle of the winter and it's snowing out, and they're commuting to work on their bikes. I've seen it. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, Gary.
I would say
Gary.
the subject illustrates an answer to an earlier question, which is why the master plan that was approved now more than 20 years ago needs an update. And it's because we see, 20, 25 years ago, the passion for cycling and walkability was not really driving people's desires here in Royal Oak. And yet today we see, especially among young people, to Mr. Talander's point, the future of our city, young people who value walkability, who want to cycle. And so the master plan includes features driven by the data that the consultants have collected that says that we should be providing those options, those non-motorized options for the future of our city.
Which I know there's a lot of people that have commented on open-ended comments that they don't see cyclists on bike lanes. We've also had a lot of cyclists saying we don't have bike lanes and we don't feel safe. But we've also looked at the data on Strava, which a lot of cyclists use, not all cyclists, but a lot of cyclists use. And Royal Oak has a significant, if you look at all of Metro Detroit, there's a huge number of cyclists in Royal Oak as compared to anywhere else. And we've heard, personal stories. I've seen people out there. I saw somebody today on Main Street north of 11 Mile. I was thinking they're crazy, but the people are there, but we also respect the right type of facility in the right place, and that's why we want to provide for safer ways for families that are not sort of the traditional bike lane. But we've also heard from folks that say, well, we also want to ride faster to be able to get longer distances, and we need a variety of facilities.
All right. Mr. Ellison.
Thank you, Gary. In our discussion about how does Royal Oak compare with other communities, it occurred to me, isn't it tougher to try to do that when we've got a city like Royal Oak of 12 square miles and 78,000 people, and we're right next door to another community that's very similar, who's right next door to another community that's very similar to that? How much impact do our neighboring communities have on our ability to accomplish what we're trying to do within our master plan? I know we talked about the impact of water, sewer, and we're all in the same system. All of our stuff goes down the same drain as everybody else's. So whatever we can do in our community to make our life easier or better or whatever, we still got to deal with Birmingham and Bloomfield, because they all drain down the same pipe. And so how easy is it for us to accomplish our goals without having to bring in the other communities to do the same thing?
Yeah, well, you definitely need regional coordination. One thing that's convenient with Birmingham is they drain mostly to the Rouge River and not to the Red Run. And Royal Oak's at the headwaters of the Red Run, so you have less of a neighboring community runoff issue than a soils issue here. But traffic certainly is a major regional problem, and that's not going to be addressed until there's more change in surrounding communities. Now that is something that Birmingham's trying to change. That's something that we're looking at here. That's something that Ferndale's addressing, and also something that Detroit's addressing. Now, some other communities, well, I know Sterling Heights is looking at that too with the redevelopment of their mall, and some of the other surrounding communities, we've seen their plans addressing it, but some others don't. So it's like a little bit of a mixed bag. Though if you look at the programs from the county and from SEMCOG, the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, that they're all advocating for relatively similar changes from a regional basis. But yeah, you are impacted from others. But I'd say in terms of the region, your directly surrounding neighbors are probably the most on board in the same direction that we're looking at going here. And I'll ask Paul, you're much more familiar with what's happening in that realm.
I think you answered it pretty well, though. Actually, I think that the plan identifies the problem or the challenges that require regional solutions, and the language, as Matt mentioned earlier, gets more into study and look into cooperation and advocate in this direction versus things that the city can't control itself.
So is it fair to say that in the end, if we don't get cooperation from our neighbors, we don't have the plan we may want? We have to modify our plan to adjust the realities of what our neighbors are doing.
To some extent, I'm not sure what's going on to further to the west. I think that you end up getting much less walkable and more auto dominant in that direction. I'm not sure, Paul, if you know what those cities are doing. I know certainly to the north and the south, and also to the east, that there's a similar direction happening there, and a focus on their business centers, their downtowns, if they have them, and in providing for a greater degree of walking and biking. Is that accurate? Yeah,
and that's definitely happening along the Woodward corridor. It's sort of a mixed bag as you move further out, but as I said earlier, there's a lot of these problems that the entirety of the Metro Detroit region are grappling with, and they have different solutions to it. But along the Woodward corridor, I think there's a lot of communities that are sort of embracing these challenges in similar ways.
All right, anyone else?